Thank you very much, Kathleen, for that great introduction. I almost believed it myself. Thank you. 5 years ago, on a chilly morning in April of 2008, I set up 2 beehives in the meadow beside my home. And I didn't do this spontaneously. I'd given it a lot of thought. What caused me to do it was that I had been reading some very distressing things in the press about the worldwide epidemic that was wiping out the honeybees all through the world. And it was mysterious and no one knew the cause of this. But it was sort of alarming. Not because I love honey, but because I learned that honeybees are responsible for the pollination of most of the food crops that go into the food on our tables. A decline in the number of honeybees in the world would result in a decline in the food on our tables. And it was alarming. So I thought that perhaps if I acted very locally in a very small way, I might be able to do something to stem the tide. My friends and family thought I was they asked me to rethink this. They said, look, you've got a full life, you do a lot of things, do you want to take on something complicated, potentially annoying and dangerous, and put us all at risk by putting these things out there? But I thought about it and I did it. In the intervening years, we've added 2 more hives, so on this day in August 7th today, I'm harboring about 250,000 bees just to the side of the house. And they're happily and harmoniously going about their business. I don't know if my bees have contributed to stemming the tide of this worldwide colony collapse disorder and done something to put things back in balance, but I know that they've done a great deal to put me back in balance. And the substance of my talk today is more about me and less about the worldwide collapse of the honeybee. But I'll show you what I mean. I, first of all, want to make it clear that I'm not here to advocate that you leave here and go and buy a beehive and put it up in your yard. It's not for everyone. But the things that can come from doing something like this are very much worthwhile, and I am going to urge you, at the end of my talk, to go out and find your own honeybees. When you think about it, the reasons to buy a beehive, there are more reasons not to do it than there are to do it. First of all, honey's really plentiful and it's cheap no matter where you go. Even boutique supermarkets in Greenville, Delaware, honey is only a couple dollars a pound. Secondly, it's complicated. You have to learn a new language, a new behavior. There's lots of unfamiliar terms. It's a little bit daunting to take this up. And third, there's the bees themselves. No one I know voluntarily wants to get close to them. They're annoying at the very least and a little bit menacing beyond that. And who wants to put themselves up to the elbows in 100,000 of these little critters? So there are a number of reasons kind of not to go into this. So how can we explain the worldwide explosion of people who have done, in the last few years, just as I have done? There are backyard beehives now up and down the Brandywine Valley. There's a beehive in the vegetable garden at the White House. There's a beehive on top of the Paris Opera. A friend of mine just traveled in China, and he said there's beehives all up and down the Bund in Shanghai. And they're in Tokyo and Berlin. These 2 hives are in an apartment courtyard in Amsterdam. And I can't see a sprig of green anywhere near, and yet these are thriving. And the bees are foraging and doing what they do. So there is a worldwide resurgence going on. There's even a wonderful company in Philadelphia called Urban Apiaries. And they have beehives on top of buildings up and down Philadelphia. And the beauty of this is, for people who want to buy extremely local food, they stamp the zip code of the hive on the side of the bottles. And you can get one from your own rooftop. So there's something to this. And I should ask, do any of you know people who have taken up beekeeping in the past several years? Quite a few. Now, are any of you yourselves beekeepers? No one's raising their hand on that one. And I can understand that. It's a little funny to admit it in public, because beekeeping, I think, has a sort of quaintness to it and a sort of reputation for fussiness. At least that's how I thought about it. And in fact, there was a reason that sort of held me back. I was going to start this earlier, but after 35 years in corporate management in a very straight-laced environment, one thing sort of loomed large, and I thought twice and then 3 times about taking up this new hobby. And frankly, it was the outfit. Used to button-down collars and three-piece suits, and everything just so, dressing for success. This wasn't in my wardrobe. So, and I felt, I put this on for the first time, and I felt like maybe sort of a cross between Mr. Rogers and an Olympic fencer. And I wasn't really sure of my new image. But just think about this. Why are they always white? Why do we have to wear white? Is there a Vogue magazine for beekeepers? Well, no, there's not. But just think, if Ralph Lauren came out with a pinstripe model, how well that would sell, or Ann Taylor with some nice pastels. I think people would flock to it. But no, there isn't a rule that we've established that says we must wear white. In fact, the bees have established that rule. You can wear white clothes like this and walk around with the bees, and they'll ignore you. But they've been conditioned over the ages to pay close attention when somebody wearing something long and dark approaches their hive. And so if you wear your Patagonia fleece when you come into the bee yard, be prepared to turn the other way very, very quickly. So those are some of the barriers to getting into this. Why do people do this? Well, first of all, every gardener knows that if there's a beehive nearby, the production from their vegetable garden and fruit trees will increase dramatically. So they know that, gardeners do. And on a commercial level, people like this drive beehives around on big flatbed trucks, and they hire themselves out, to hire the bees out to commercial crop growers, like this field of canola in Europe. They drive, they put the sides up, the bees go out for a day or for 2 days, the sides come down, the driver collects his fee and goes off to the next field. So people know that this is a valuable thing that they do. And people have heard a lot about the colony collapse disorder, so they want to do something, as I did, to help stem that tide. The best thinking these days is that this epidemic is continuing. Biologists and business people are working together to try to figure out what exactly is going wrong, colony collapsing like they are around the world. And the best thinking right now is that it's some combination of very effective new pesticides, and they're called neonicotinoids, and fungicides, which were thought to be harmless to bees. But the bees, take the nectar and the pollen from these treated plants back to the hives. And then as the colony feeds on this, it seems to weaken their resistance to pests that were already in the hives since time immemorial. So the small viruses and mites can now decimate a colony which formerly would have resisted them. So people know about that, and they want to do the right thing. Another very compelling reason for somebody to take up beekeeping is that they have a friend or a neighbor who has just done it, and they've had a bottle of the honey from their local neighborhood. And when you taste your local honey, there's something strangely and instantly familiar about it. And it doesn't just taste like honey from the supermarket. It reminds you of that day last summer when you stepped out into the yard just after the rain had stopped and you inhaled the fragrance of the entire earth and every blooming thing and every growing thing. And that's what the bees take back day after day to the hives in your local area. So no two honeys taste the same. And by the way, the little bottles on your table here are the last of my harvest from 2012, from last summer. And I invite you to take a sip, or at least smell it. And this is also, I didn't plan this, but since we were all drinking at lunch, I think a little shot of sugar wouldn't be a bad thing for many of us. So this picture on the slide here is a number of vintages from my beehives. Same beehives, same location, entirely different honeys. They taste different, they look different, the bouquet is different. It's exactly like a vineyard that turns out different vintages of wine that taste different and have different characteristics. So it's a very compelling and interesting reason which causes a lot of people to get into this. Now, one of the last reasons you'd expect to get into beekeeping would be the thought that intruding into the personal lives of 100,000 heavily armed insects would bring you inner peace. And that was a surprising twist that I found. I'll explain what I mean. There are several reasons. The first is you master a new craft. I mean, not a new craft, but an ancient craft. But you learn to do something difficult and challenging. You learn how to set up new hives in the springtime. You learn how, in the summertime, you need to provide ventilation for the hives. And you can, a wine cork works great. You put it in between the top two levels, and it lets the hot air go out of the hives. The bees don't care what kind of wine cork it is. Any old label will do. So just to get that. So you learn that, and you do this over time. At the appropriate time, you harvest your share of the honey, cut the wax off of it, put the frames into a centrifuge, and you may not be able to see it on this slide here, but little threads of pure gold spin off of the honey. They drain down, you filter it, you collect it, and you put it in bottles. And then that can go on the shelf. There's nothing added, nothing taken away. And it can sit on a shelf for decades and not spoil. It's the unique property of honey. And then at the end of the year, you know when to wrap them up, leave them alone for the wintertime. And this photo is about Thanksgiving in the year, and they sleep for the winter. There we go. Another interesting factor that I've learned and I've noticed by paying attention to my bees is that I admire their society. And I think we should pattern ours more after theirs than we do. We could pattern any large group, say a corporation or entire societies, over the way they work. They constantly communicate. They coordinate their efforts. They're all dedicated to a purpose larger than themselves, and they all cooperate to create something that's lasting and beautiful and useful. And so I have had a boost of optimism every time I've looked at the bees and contemplated the seamlessness that they organize their life and the way they carry out their business. And beyond that, looking at the bees makes me aware that they are part of much larger cycles than the daily life that I have seen and been involved in myself. Looking at the bees as they go about their business brings me in mind of the vast cycles of the seasons and helps transport me to a little bit higher awareness of the natural world. This little bee was sitting on a chrysanthemum last October, and you can see the golden color of the pollen that she's collecting. That'll go back into the hive. And in March, you'll see bright neon green pollen from a crocus that's blooming half a mile away. So I've been kind of transported beyond myself by watching these little creatures. And I've been deepened in my own practices by working with the bees. Because if I come out and I'm impatient or I jostle the frames around, they're going to get annoyed and they're going to come after me and sting me. And I hate that because I'm very susceptible to it. I've only been stung a half dozen times, but every one of them is memorable because I swell up and it hurts for days and stuff. So I've noticed that if I calm down and approach my tasks with care and mindfulness, that the bees let me do my thing and they do their thing. So I have been taught by the bees to operate in a sort of flow where I'm totally mindfully alert and yet at the same time totally relaxed. So mindfulness, alertness, and total relaxation to carry out my tasks. Does that sound familiar to anyone who practices yoga or anyone who prays regularly or attempts to meditate on a regular basis? Mindfulness, total focus, total relaxation at the same time. And it's given me great benefits in other areas of my life. They've taught me that it's not the big showy flowers that attract them. Here they are crawling all over a little vine that was on along a fence in the edge of my property. They ignore the big showy gladiolas and stuff in people's cultivated gardens in favor of the little nondescript flowers tucked away where you wouldn't even notice them. So humility and grace come from this. Now, I've been waxing poetic about their characteristics. It's not that bees are my friend. I don't think they have such a concept. I certainly never can understand their alien consciousness. They are not our friends. We can't humanize them, but we can admire them. Just because something is alien and unfriendly doesn't mean it's less than us. And very worthy of our respect because as you watch them, you notice that they're tapped into something far, far beyond what we see in our daily routines. I feel I've been adopted in a sense because here's a picture last week of a perfectly capped honeycomb, which I'll harvest next week. I feel that by nurturing a few generations of these complex creatures, I have been brought into a little bit better understanding of the vast ancient patterns that they live in and the cycles that govern their life. And by participating and helping them, I feel I've been elevated a little bit by that action. Now, I started out by saying, don't go out and try this at home. Not unless you want to, but do go out and find something that moves you in this same direction. And what do I mean by that? I mean, find something, and we've heard many wonderful examples here today. Find something that exists beyond you, beyond your comfort zone, beyond your control. Because if you plug into that and you try to be helpful, even in your small way, on a personal basis, it can't help but increase your horizons. And what will be the result of that? The result will be a dawning sense, after a period of time of this practice, a dawning sense of balance, purity, occasional moments of panic, I have to say, but a participation in something meaningful and well beyond your normal frame of life. And so, don't buy a beehive, but do go out today and find your own swarm of joy. Expect to find it in the most unexpected place. I found mine in the middle of a swarming horde of stinging insects. And if you can do it there, it can happen anywhere. But find something to lift yourself up and dedicate yourself to. And how will you know it when you find this? Well, you'll have a creeping sensation that you're yourself as you've never been before. A little bit larger, a little bit taller than you were before. And just step back and smile when this happens as you watch the transformation of your daily routines right before your very eyes, turning into something of purity, something of solid gold. Thank you.